Hello and welcome to the Crypto Insider interview. I am Vlad, and today my guests are Riccardo Spagni of Monero, who is also working on Tari, and his partner who develops Mimble Wimble sidechain for Monero, whose name is Cayle. Hello.
Hey Vlad, how you doing?
Well, I'm okay. I'm actually happy that I get to do this. This is the second time when I interview Riccardo, and I'm actually wearing this to prove that I'm a loyal Magical Crypto fan. And I didn't get to meet you before, Cayle, but this is a pleasure, and it's good to meet somebody who works on something that's going to be added to a legitimate project for once.
Good, it's a pleasure, and looking forward to our chat.
So what is Tari? Because there have been many speculations, even on Magical Crypto, that it might be this project which starts an ICO, or that Riccardo will leave Monero to start working on Tari. And to some people, maybe that the projects are not very clear and they are not certain what it is that Tari works on. And even I looked at the website, and on the About Us section, it says, our mission is to steward the most useful decentralized platform that empowers anyone to create digitally scarce things people love. And that's kind of general. Doesn't say too much.
Yeah, so I think Tari is a very generalized platform. So it's designed to, or meant to be, a platform for decentralized assets. And that's the thing that we want it to become. So what is a digital asset? A digital asset are things like loyalty points, in-game tokens, in-game assets, digital collectibles. ICOs are digital assets. STO, security tokens, are digital assets. Tickets. These are all things that are natively digital assets. You can almost tokenize anything that's natively digital. DRM, for example, you could create a tokenized DRM where you own a token that allows you to play a song, to decrypt a song and play it. And so there's, licensing for software can be done via a tokenized model. But as long as it's natively digital, that's the trick there. Tari's not meant to be for other weird things it's not really fit for purpose for things like representing gold on the blockchain, because that's a waste of time anyway. So, I mean, people can use it for anything, but that's largely useless. And obviously, we're building it in a way that is very much inspired by the way Monero was built, or has been built over time, which is as an open source community, not as a company who is just doing this thing.
Yeah, there's one of the key words in that mission is the word steward. We are a part of Tari Labs, which is not Tari. Tari Labs is an independent company, and we happen to work on this open source project called Tari. And we see our role really as to foster the community, do a lot of the grunt work, but ultimately it's a community project and not a Tari Labs project. So, the whole concept of ownership does not belong to us. We have a lot of ideas. Riccardo's got a lot of ideas, but we really want to bring the community in and make it a truly open source and community-driven project. On the topic of digital assets, I mean, the reason we're doing native digital assets is, there's something called the Oracle problem, which is something that almost all of the supply chain management and diamonds on the blockchain and all these other projects really failed to address. And it's a really difficult problem to connect real world things to things on the blockchain, because the blockchain can't go in and look at an object or interact with the real world in any way. That is an absolutely non-trivial problem. I'm not sure it's even solvable. It may be.
But maybe for certain classes of assets.
Right. But we're focusing on native digital assets, things that their entire existence is essentially digital.
I know that about a month ago, we saw the news about Fortnite adding Monero as a mean of payment. And their own digital currency, which you can purchase in game, is something which may concern Tari. So do you see yourselves being featured as an alternative or offering the kind of solution that you develop for games like Fortnite?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think a company like Epic that has a successful game like Fortnite already has deployed a large amount of infrastructure to handle that burgeoning economy. And the thought of moving that across to a blockchain-based or decentralized system is probably pretty daunting. So I'm certainly not imagining that Fortnite is going to start issuing V-Bucks on Monero. On Tari rather. But there's definitely a future where game designers will go, hey, we want to have an in-game currency. We want to have in-game items, the sword of whatever. And instead of having to do that in a centralized way and manage all those profiles and manage all that, they'll be able to just issue it in this decentralized fashion and offload a lot of the back-end functionality that they would otherwise have had to build from scratch in a very centralized way.
Yeah, the other key advantage of having digital assets in an ecosystem like Tari is that you break down all these walled gardens, and interoperability opens up, and there's all sorts of cool things you can start to do if everyone is working in this ecosystem rather than all these proprietary silos. And going forward, I think there's a lot of interesting opportunities for people like Epic Games and what have you to kind of come on board and leverage some of the synergies that are going to be unlocked by virtue of the fact that this is a very distributed and open digital assets platform.
Yeah, so you could imagine a scenario right now where if you're a gamer and you play a particular game, and you've built up a reputation, and you've got all of the ships and all of the guns and all of the ponies and whatever, and now you want to transition over into playing another game, you don't carry that over with you. You lose all of that and you start from scratch. And it would be pretty cool if it existed in a decentralized way where there weren't these walled gardens where you could go, oh, cool, I can rent my stuff out because I'm not going to play that game for a while. I can sell my stuff to other people. And, there are companies like Opskins and so on that have tried to create this, but in the existing environment of just a bunch of walled gardens and saying, please, can you give us some API into your system? And that, then you just have a bunch of disparate APIs, assuming you even get access. And that's almost impossible. So, really giving game manufacturers a new playing field is key to something like this.
Yeah, the other idea is that, if you're using in-game items as an example, like if you own a sword in a game or something, you literally own it. And it'll be attached to some private key, and you will have possession of that item, which that ownership will be independent of whether that game exists in the future or what have you. And that unlocks another whole bunch of exciting opportunities, because then I can go and sell my sword to Riccardo, and the game developer has no say in that. Now, the game developers might balk at that initially, but I think once they think about what this really means long term, it's actually something that's very exciting rather than something they should be scared of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine a world in which I play Candy Crush and then I start playing World of Warcraft and I want to transfer the gold which I have in Candy Crush and convert it into currency in World of Warcraft. And I guess that can be possible. And also I'm thinking, you mentioned tickets, and maybe that I buy a concert ticket for a show which gets canceled. And instead of going to the register and asking for a refund and going through all that process, I can have the kind of currency which can be used for another concert.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of really cool stuff that asset issuers will be able to do, especially dealing with failure scenarios like that, like a concert is canceled, or loyalty points need to be revoked or whatever. Like there's all sorts of really cool tools that Tari we hope will be able to provide provide issuers rather, and they'll be able to use that to not only engage better with their user base, with their customers, but also provide almost instant responses to situations like that.
Are you just as excited about tokenizing stocks and bonds and whatnot?
That's a good question. So I'm a big believer in security tokens, not as an asset class. I think that there's regulation that needs to be written around security tokens, and it's still very early days. And unfortunately, a lot of, we need to play within the bounds of what regulators want to do there, because it's not security tokens are not decentralized or disconnected from the issuer. The issuing company, the issuing organization is indelibly linked to those security tokens. And so I'm excited about companies that or startups even, that are interested in tokenizing their shares and, having those tokens represent voting rights and stuff like that. I think that there's a bunch of really interesting opportunities there. And I can absolutely imagine a future where VCs and individuals and home offices and so on are investing in startups, and they're immediately getting the tokens, when the company spins up, and they can exit whenever they want to. Instead of having to wait for some future liquidity event, they can get have that liquidity event much faster, and even have some sort of aggregate selling plan where they dispose of those tokens over time. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that opens up with security tokens, but it is reliant on some regulatory clarity.
So what kind of projects or developments by Tari are tied into Monero or Bitcoin or some other protocol?
Good question. So there's a lot of things that at Tari Labs and amongst the broader Tari community, there are a lot of things that we're interested in and excited about. On the Bitcoin side, we're very excited about Lightning and about what's happening and about the progress that's happening there. And we want Tari to, at least to some degree, be available to the Lightning network. So we have some of the Tari Labs resources that have been doing work on Rust Lightning, which is Matt Corallo's implementation. And we think that there's a lot of scope for interoperability and interactivity over Lightning, not for everything, but for certain things. On the Monero side, we're big believers in privacy. We think that, again, asset issuers can benefit from privacy, not necessarily as an issuer, but from their user base. They don't need to know who's buying, who owns loyalty points or who's buying a ticket. They don't need to know who owns all of the in-game tokens. They need to be able to communicate with them in some way, but that's not the same as being able to identify the actual people. We've seen in the past that organizations are terrible at storing metadata. They are awful at storing profiles of people. And so when you start playing a game and you've got to put in, KYC AML data to go buy something in the game, then that gets stored by the game designer, by the game manufacturer, developer. And now they have that information on you. And then when they get hacked, what gets owned? Well, it's always, email addresses, usernames, passwords. Now you're adding actual data on the person. And we think that we can provide infrastructure as a project that is better, that can, we can just do better. So there's an ideological link to Monero, and there's of course a very real practical link to Monero, because Tari will be merge mined with Monero, which means it doesn't have additional proof of work costs. It's not like you have to mine Tari individually or separately, but you will mine Monero and get Tari along with it, which I think is also quite a exciting thing, because there's been a lot of concerns about proof of work cryptocurrencies and whether they're bad for the environment. So hey, here's a way of still doing a proof of work cryptocurrency without an additional proof of work burden.
When I
just
first
a
sent
note
you the, oh, sorry, you wanted to add something.
I just wanted to make a note on the merge mining. So there's, what's becoming apparent is I'm sure you've been aware of all the 51% attacks and things. You can, if you're going to do proof of work, you can either choose a proof of work algorithm that's already in use by some other cryptocurrency, in which case you're at massive risk of a 51% attack because everyone using that can just shift over onto your network at a moment's notice and swamp the existing hash rate on your blockchain. Another approach is to invent a brand new proof of work algorithm. But one of the rules of blockchain is don't roll your own crypto. So that unless you have several cryptographers with PhDs in your pocket, that's probably not a good idea.
And even then, you probably shouldn't do it anyway.
Yeah, like use tried and tested things. And then the other route is merge mining, which is basically bootstrapping, piggybacking on the security of an existing blockchain, which is the route that Tari will likely take. So it's kind of, I feel, a pretty good compromise amongst a bunch of options that aren't terribly good across the board. But merge mining is sort of the best compromise, I think.
The lesser of three evils.
Yeah.
So when I first pitched this interview, it was all about the Mimble Wimble fever and how we saw the launches of Beam and Grin. And we even witnessed how Bitcoin maximalists were publicly presenting their fascination with Grin and the whole protocol and the idea that you can have a more minimalistic approach to privacy, which takes up less block space. And I remembered at the time that there was this sidechain project being developed for Monero, about which I've read. So I wrote to Riccardo and asked him if he could do this interview. And then he said that it's Cayle who develops it. And I'd like to know if you think that the implementation of Mimble Wimble as a side chain is going to be superior to having a separate blockchain and a proprietary cryptocurrency.
Well, first of all, I'm not developing it. I mean, I'm just part of a team that's at Tari Labs, and we work on Tari. But as I said before, it's really a community-driven project. So ultimately, mine is just one voice out of many. Look, in terms of Mimble Wimble, it is really an exciting technology. It brings a lot of new innovations into the space. It's a bit of a radical new look at approaching blockchains, particularly around scaling. The amount of data that you need to store is far less than in Bitcoin, for example. With all the competing Mimble Wimble implementations out there, I don't have particularly strong opinions. I like the fact that there are other Mimble Wimble implementations out there. It tries things out, tests the waters. If there are any major deficiencies or problems, it's better to have more people trying it out than one going it alone. Grin in particular is quite an interesting project because it's keeping to the ethos of pre-mine, totally volunteer-driven, pseudo-anonymous developers. So I'm following that with interest, and I'm looking to learn from those projects as much as anything else. And I'm certainly not an expert. I don't think any of us here know everything about everything, and that's the beauty of living in a world where almost all development is done open source. We just give everything away for free. People can use it as they wish, for good or for evil, hopefully for good. And that makes the world a better place. That's kind of how I see it.
So what is your opinion on the potential of the technology? Do you think it's as revolutionary as the French version of Lord Voldemort claims to be?
Look, I think Mimble Wimble is an exciting technology. But at the end of the day, one of the things that I always keep reminding people of is Bitcoin has lasted for a decade. It survived for a decade live. And any new technology, including Monero, has to last at least that long before we can give it the same level of trust that Bitcoin has right now. And a new technology like Mimble Wimble, despite having been around in theoretical form for a year or two, is still just that. It's, theoretical, unlaunched, unproven. Now we actually have two networks, and when Tari launches a third network that will use Mimble Wimble, or that uses Mimble Wimble in a production, live, whatever environment. And that's just the start. Because it is such a new protocol, because it is so unproven and so untested, we're going to have to see how things play out over years. With Bitcoin, there were many things that Satoshi never predicted at the beginning, like mining pools, the existence of mining pools. And with Grin and Beam, and with Tari's protocol, base protocol as well, I'm sure there are things that we haven't figured out that we're going to be quite surprised people start doing as these projects really start getting a foothold and establishing themselves. So, is it exciting? Yes. Should we exercise caution with it? Absolutely. It's like a new cryptographic primitive. You're going to give it like 30 years before you start using it. And this isn't doesn't have to be as bad as that, but I mean, we definitely need to give it some time to grow, and for the user base to grow, for the amount of money locked up in it to grow, before we start getting overly excited and saying, hey, maybe Bitcoin should switch to it.
I've actually read the proposal for Mimble Wimble. I'm sorry, I keep on saying it the wrong way. I read the proposal, and it's a pretty radical statement about the state of cryptocurrencies and privacy coins. And it's like coming up and saying everything else which has been done before is wrong, and I can prove to you that I can do it better than you and have a minimalistic approach to it. And what I was thinking at the time was that you received that tweet from Cabra on Twitter, and he said that he basically, in a nutshell, he said that Monero is doomed and obsolete and you should be finding something else to do. And I wish at the time, I wish I had done the interview earlier, so this could be a proper reply in which you said that everything requires to stand the test of time. And what I was going to ask is, I know there's speculation about the technology behind Grin being implemented as a Bitcoin sidechain. And do you think that's a good privacy model? Or do you think it's going to have the same degree of privacy that you have with a currency which has its own blockchain and is natively privacy driven?
Yeah, look, I think that there's still, like with something like Grin and Mimble Wimble in general, there's still aspects of privacy that are lacking. In particular, you've got this whole passive listening node issue, and there's no quick fix to that, because a lot of the attempts at fixing that require interactivity with a bunch of other random people, and hoping that you can obscure things that way. So, CoinJoin, which suffers from liquidity issues and liquidity-based attacks. And yeah, there's attempts at working around that, and I'm always interested in seeing how that will develop. But I'm not convinced that something requiring an inordinate amount of interactivity to create a private transaction, which of course has liquidity risk, then is a superior solution to something that can be done non-interactively, where you have the chain data available to mix with, as you have with like Monero and Zcash Z-address transactions. That said, I think I'm just excited in general about anything that pushes the technology, the privacy enhancing technology ahead, because who knows, there's some hypothetical future which combines the best of many worlds, and I don't know what that is, but I'm very interested to see what it is when we get there. I do think that there is a lot that a layer 2 system can add from a privacy perspective, but I think that that's probably better suited to Lightning with stuff like Tumblebit, as a way of adding additional levels of privacy to Lightning than just a different chain that has different trade-offs.
So ultimately, you think there's too much hype with this new technology, which is still untested?
Yeah, and I mean, hype is not a bad thing. I think it's good that people get excited, but get excited and have strong, vigorous technical arguments around it. Don't get excited and sell your house to buy something. That's just irrational.
So where do you see privacy coins in 5 to 10 years?
Well, I personally hope that privacy coins are going to be dominant enough that it'll force everyone else's hand. That between Bitcoin having enhanced privacy through something like Lightning and Tumblebit, between Monero and the work being done on ZK stocks by Starkware, between Grin and Beam and Tari, between all of these projects that are building various aspects, various privacy enhancing aspects, I'm hoping that it's just going to force everyone, force a reckoning where everyone will have to go, okay, privacy is it's accessible, strong privacy is and so we can't regulate that, we can't prevent it, we can't stop people from going down this road, because all we're going to end up doing is like people are going to use it anyway, and then it ends up becoming like weed, and then you have this whole like war on drugs, and you're arresting people for growing weed in their garden, and you expend, as a government, billions of dollars on this, and ultimately the thing ends up getting legalized anyway, and all you've done is waste time if you just sort of sucked it up at the beginning and not gone down that road. And I think we're going to see the same. I think that at the moment, governments, law enforcement agencies, and others are going, private transactions, that's so frightening, that's so scary. What happens if people don't pay their taxes? And then the government stops working for a few months, like it has in the States right now, even though people pay their taxes. And over time, they'll start to realize that actually you can still do proper law enforcement without needing to see everyone's transactions. You can still do proper tax collection without needing to see into everyone's bank account. So I think that it's just a mindset that needs to change, and hopefully with the added growth and success of a lot of these privacy enhancing technologies and cryptocurrencies, we will see a forcing factor there.
I think the best comparison that I read on the internet in regards to privacy coins deals with envelopes to cover letters. So in the first days of postal services, maybe that not everybody was using an envelope to hide the message, to conceal its content. And perhaps that the authorities were concerned that dangerous messages were getting across and they were not able to do proper intelligence and secret services. But they discovered in time that when privacy becomes the norm, there is far less to hide. And when everybody exchanges envelopes which are sealed and it's very hard to control, you can find other ways around doing intelligence and secret services. And you can inform the government to ensure proper security by other means. And I guess it's the same with cryptocurrencies, except for the fact that the taxes are on the line, and that's what the stake is.
Well, if you see those on you, then you start to appreciate the importance of cryptocurrencies or privacy-based cryptocurrencies, because that it takes that decision out of the hands of the government. And I think we kind of feel, well, personally, it's perhaps not a Tari Labs position, but privacy is a right, and technology has allowed the governments and other state agencies to encroach more and more into that right. And this is a reaction. It's a way of us saying, no, we're taking that right back. And that's really the role of privacy going forward. And you're going to hear a lot of stories, like you said, when all the messages and the letters aren't in envelopes, and there's one inside an envelope, that draws attention to it, because why is that guy hiding something? That is a great analogy. The governments have basically invented X-ray. Technologies allowed them to look into those envelopes, and now we're saying, no, too much. We need to get back to the point where you have no right to see what's going on inside of these envelopes, and we're just continuing the arms race, I guess, to seal those things off again. It's a right. We're not people who advocate privacy in money and messaging are not criminals. I think they're just trying to stand up for what is fundamentally a human right.
But I can think even about people within the cryptocurrency industry who lobby and promote regulations, and they say that they need rules, like in the case of Gemini. And there's this mob mentality which says that you have nothing to hide, right? So if you're trying to hide something, then clearly you must be a criminal. It's this fallacious analogy which sometimes people make when they hear about privacy.
Yeah, what's the alternative saying? Show me an innocent man and give me 5 minutes into his personal records or something like that.
It's I've often sort of said to people, like, if you think that privacy is bad, or if you think that wanting to hide something is indicative of some sort of ill intent, then why do you have curtains in your house? Like, are you happy for us to remove the curtains in your house? Like, you want privacy in the general sense, because what you do in the comfort of your own home typically should be up to you. And that's not to say that law enforcement shouldn't be able to peek into your home, but they should only do so if they have like an actual suspicion of wrongdoing. What we have right now is the opposite, where everyone is suspected of wrongdoing. So we want to have like cameras in everyone's house all the time, just in case what you're doing is wrong. I mean, it's ludicrous. It's absolutely ludicrous. I'm all for active surveillance and for law enforcement going and taking whatever action they need, but passive surveillance is too far.
I think this also has to do with the philosophy on human nature, when some people say that we are natively evildoers and we should be tamed and we should be watched all the time because we only behave nicely when we know that we can be punished. While at the same time, there are positivists who say that evildoers are not the norm but the exception, and it's up to us who are the good, willing, and honest actors to actually collaborate with the authorities and turn in people who actually give the whole idea of freedom and reputation a bad name. Otherwise, we might as well have the kind of Orwellian society, which, even if it's implemented, it still has its leaks and its flaws.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Richard Dawkins even writes about this, that we've actually evolved, and our current model is a model that works, is to be trusting, but punish people who deviate. So default is we assume you're going to be good, but we have mechanisms to hit you if you don't play by the rules, rather than assume that everybody is going to be wrong and evil and steal at the slightest chance that they get, and just have this completely draconian system. I think what that ends up doing is that you waste an inordinate amount of resources enforcing the system, whereas those resources could have been employed in much more productive and creative pursuits, which ultimately is more successful. And that's why I brought up Dawkins, because evolution is this ultimate optimization algorithm.
Yeah, but at the same time, I guess we need a mass education in this regard to make people appreciate and protect their own privacy. And even in my case, I went yesterday to the post office to pick up a package, and they had to ask me what's inside, and I had to sign some papers and basically say that there's nothing dangerous or malevolent in it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's
I mean, I'm sorry I interrupt, but you develop all these great projects and you have these intentions to maximize the amount of privacy that we have, but it's up to us, the regular users and the regular citizens who have no coding experience and just go with life in a very non-cypherpunk way, to actually start to appreciate the technologies that we can have and see the positive side in them. Otherwise, we are going to fall for this narrative that we all have something to hide if we use it. And by default, we should be associated with criminals. Just like, I'm not sure if it's the best example, but there's that website which promotes free speech, which is called gab.com. And whoever signs up gets associated by the left-wing minded people to fascism and alt-right and misogyny and everything that is terrible.
Yeah, you raise a valid point, and that's obviously, in my mind, that's the failure. That's a perspective failure mode for everything that we're doing, right? Is that just not enough people care, and so ultimately using privacy enhancing tools flags you as a deviant, flags you as somebody who, you know, has got something to hide. But that environment where simply the use of a privacy enhancing tool flags you as a potential criminal is totally Orwellian, and it's not an environment that I want to be in. And I think that, you know, through a combination of good user experience and good merchant-facing tools and just really educating people on the need to reclaim privacy, I think we can get to a point where privacy is the norm and not the other way around.
I think privacy is also ideologically driven, even though every human being craves for a degree of privacy, and that's why we conceal our bodies with clothes, and that's why we shut the door when we go to the bathroom. But I guess there is one specific audience which appreciates financial privacy and other types of, for example, browsing privacy, other types of privacy in general. There are some people who believe that the state or the government is very good and does a terrific job collecting data, and they feel safer when they think about it, and they may not ever access anything on the dark web or try to access something beyond their field of interest or their daily activities. But that's still not an argument to block other people's freedom.
Yeah, it's true.
Right. And, you know, what I love about once you dive down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, you have to become a bit of an economist.
Yeah.
And, you know, economics is really about the study of incentives. And if you drill down to the base level, what incentivizes governments? It's not really good rule of law. No. It's staying in power.
Yeah.
So governments are incentivized to do whatever it takes to stay in power. And so this idea that, oh, we're surveilling you for your own good is a little bit of a straw man argument, because what they really want to do is make sure that nobody is going to take them out of power.
Yeah.
But they're very good at spinning it to say, yeah, we're doing this for your own good. And, you know, if you don't, bad things are going to happen and bad guys are going to come and blow things up. You know, in reality, that's not really what governments are about.
So do you think that ultimately, if your privacy projects succeed, we are going to see a more consensus-based social contract with the governments in which we get to agree to what they do and we get to find out if we are being tracked, and we willingly get into exchanges which are transparent and fair?
That would be the ideal, wouldn't it? But I don't think that reality will work out that way. You know, like Cayle said, governments are incentivized to stay in power, and they're the ones with the tanks and the guns and the bombs, right? And what do we have? Well, we've got software, so there's that.
Software and mathematics.
Yes. But what I do think is software and mathematics is surprisingly powerful. And whilst I don't think we're going to unseat any governments, what I do think we are going to do is hopefully create a bit of a forcing factor where regulatory arbitrage becomes a thing, where a government goes, hey, you know, like there are all these smart people that want good schools for their kids, you know, good police work, good government, and they'll create businesses and bring brain power into our country. And all we need to do is just like embrace privacy, embrace the self-sovereignty in cryptocurrencies, and we'll attract those people. And they'll start passing laws that you know that do that, and it'll become an attractive place to live. And people will go, hey, I should move my startup to that country because there are really good laws for that, and it, you know, the laws support like me running my blockchain startup or my whatever startup in that country, and there's tax breaks and and all sorts of cool tax stuff. And hey, you know, it's not just a company that I can move there. I can also see myself living there because the weather's pretty reasonable and the schools are great, and like, you know, it's a safe, not necessarily like completely safe, but it's a reasonable environment for my kids. And so now I'm going to like uproot my entire family and move there as well. And when that starts happening, and it already does happen to a smaller scale in the States, where, you know, people will live in one state and they'll be like, oh, cool, if I move my business like 2 states over, I get these tax breaks, and there's this state law which, you know, gives me personal tax breaks. So I'm going to do that. People literally uproot their lives and move halfway across the country. So when it starts happening on like a inter-country or intra-country level, it's going to be extremely interesting. And that regulatory arbitrage is, I think, the potential for the future, not unseating governments and having them topple just because we wrote some code.
So if you were to talk to a regular person who believes in the goodwill and the good nature of the state, how would you convince them to use privacy products, even if we talk about browsers or cryptocurrencies like Monero or Zcash? What is the definitive argument that you would use to make them at least think twice about their choices?
So it's actually interesting. In interviews that I did a few years back, people would talk about government, and they would say to me, like, you know, what do I feel about government? And my honest opinion is that we've tried different forms of government in the past. We've tried monarchies and, you know, different forms of democracy and all sorts of things, you know, and none of them have really worked particularly well. And people would go, oh yeah, but, you know, democracy works okay. And you fast forward to 2018 and 2019, and when I say that now, and this is not in interviews with like cypherpunks or even people who are necessarily in IT. When I say that now to people, to ordinary people, a lot of them go, yeah, you're absolutely right. So I'm starting to see a shift in people's view of government, in them understanding that like we're actually pretty bad at governing ourselves. Historically, we've not been good at it, and we're not good at it now. And even when you do have something like a reasonable democracy, you know, there's no clear winner. And that's why I'm hopeful that as the tide starts to shift, as people start to realize that, you know, governments and costs, through no fault of their own, just through a misalignment of incentives, then people will start to change the way they interact with governments and corporations. They'll stop saying, oh, you know, this corporation asked me for all of my personal data, but they're letting me play Farmville, so here we go. They'll start going, well, no, why do you need all my personal data? Why does the Torch app need access to my contacts and my messages on my phone? You know, people will start to think this stuff through because they will develop a natural, healthy skepticism instead of the natural unhealthy gullibility that they have right now.
That's a pretty optimistic view. But I'm sorry, Cayle, you should say your point.
Yeah, I mean, just to circle back to Tari, I mean, that's part of what the mission of Tari is about, is to put the correct value on some of these, the private information. So that example of playing a game by giving out this information, consumers are incredibly bad at pricing that information. They are terrible at realizing how valuable that information really is. And so they give it away at a massive discount. And Facebook and Google and these corporations of the world are making an absolute killing on their behalf. In a privacy-focused digital assets platform like Tari, the idea will be to literally enforce through software, through rules enforced by a blockchain, that you only give away the information that you need to. It's a complete need-to-know basis, and you're in control of your information again. If you've bought something, you're not renting it. It's not just something that's sitting on a server. You literally own it. It's yours. You can sell it again to some third party without the original asset issuer having any say in it, if that's how that asset has been structured. I mean, we have other ideas where you could exert more control if you want, but in the sort of there's a fair kind of way of looking at things. We're putting a lot of control back into the individual's hands, which is quite exciting for me personally.
Well, I really appreciate your answers, and I don't think I have any more questions at this time. I'm happy that we had that discussion about Mimble Wimble, which used to be all the rage last week. And then we spoke about the philosophy of privacy and how it's important to not only appreciate the technology, but spread the underlying ideology of it and make people understand why it's important to care. And thank you very much. I hope we are going to have another interview sometime and talk about the developments of Tari Labs and how far you have come to allowing me to transfer my World of Warcraft gold and maybe convert it into Monero. That would be really cool.
Cool. Thanks so much for the interview, Vlad.
That's been great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. This will get posted maybe today. I'm going to work on it.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Have a good day.
Good luck and have fun working on your projects.
We'll do.
We do.
All right, we'll chat soon.
Bye.
Cheers.